And welcome back. So thank you again for coming to the second episode of New Bright Lights, and thank you for willing to be inside on this beautiful day. We are now up to our second speaker, Bill Briscall from Rain City Housing. He is going to tell you all about the lovely organization that he works with. Then after that, we are going on to Wendy 13, and she is going to tell us all about the Cobalt and her work to continue the punk scene and keep it alive in Vancouver. So please put your hands together for Bill.
Two lights. Good afternoon, everyone. Once upon a time, there was a little town called Vancouver. But it didn't stay little very long. The Hastings Strip became the place to be. Loggers would come to the city for some R&R. It was the bustling downtown. It's an awkward place to put the laptop. And the Hastings Strip was the entertainment district. It was where the pubs were, where the clubs were, and there were lots and lots of hotels. And during the first 3 decades of the 20th century, the little town grew. In 1900, there was 26,000 people living in Vancouver. In 1931, there was 246,000 people living in Vancouver. Once upon a time, not far from Vancouver, there was a hospital. It was a hospital for the mind. It was originally named Essendale and later Riverview. In the 1950s, it had as many as 4,630 patients. In the last 3 decades of the 20th century, it went from 3,000 patients to less than 300. And it's the combination of these two stories, the fact that the city grew so quickly in the first part of the 20th century, and that fact the hospital, Riverview Hospital, downsized so quickly that led to a concentration of services in the downtown east side. And Rain City Housing is one of those services. Rain City Housing came on the scene in 1982 as part of the St. James Community Services. The first shelter, or our first building, was called Triage on Main Street. It was actually almost across the street from the Cobalt, where Wendy 13 is going to talk about later. In 1930, we became our own nonprofit society, Triage Emergency Services and Care Society. And in 1993, we moved to 707 Powell Street. There we set up a 28-bed single-room shelter, and above the shelter is Wind Chimes Apartments with 27 studio suites. And then we did nothing, relatively nothing, for 7 years. We didn't expand, we didn't grow, but we looked a lot internally to see what kind of changes we wanted to make philosophically and policy changes as well. And it's those changes that we think is what makes us unique. The first thing we did was providing a client-centered approach. And it's essentially about respect. Respecting an individual's life experiences and acknowledging that they are the experts in their own life. This also goes a long way towards building trust and having real conversations about what someone wants to do next. I personally find this really hard to do initially. I started working in the downtown east side almost 20 years ago, and I was a 23-year-old kid from the BC's interior, knew nothing about the downtown east side or homelessness or mental illness or addictions. And I worked for a different nonprofit for about 7 years, and I wanted to change the world. I wanted to fix people because I thought I knew what was best for them. And when I started working for Rain City Housing about 10 years ago, I had to let go of that. I had to change the way I worked with people. I had to feel comfortable riding along instead of being in the driver's seat. The next thing there's a little quote there that I like from Margaret J. Wheatley, if you can read. But just acknowledges the fact that there's always a power structure when you're given that privilege of working with people and being a part of their lives. And it's just to recognize that that there's that structure and try and, if at all costs, try and eliminate it, make it an even playing field. Harm reduction. Michelle and Lauren's presentation earlier talks about the MAP ban, and that is a form of harm reduction. And a lot of people, when they hear harm reduction, they think just drug use or just the sex trade, but it's much, much, much broader than that. It's about eating healthier meals, about feeling safer where you live. And even you can take it into the rest of society. Wearing your seatbelt is harm reduction. Wearing a bike helmet is harm reduction. So it's important to know that it's a very, very wide approach. The next thing that we looked at was housing first, and it's a term that gets thrown around a lot these days. It gets talked about as something new. We opened up a program in 2001 called Princess Rooms that I used to manage, and we opened up a program called the Vivian that Michelle spoke about earlier, and where she used to work actually. And those two places were opened, one to address the need of people coming again and again, returning to our shelter, and realizing that they were being evicted because they were exhibiting certain behavior, they had survival skills to get by, and they weren't being housed. And so by providing housing first, and then looking at the reasons why those things are going on in their life, people are also no longer in a shelter on the street and stepped outside that cycle of homelessness. It's based on a model that's used in New York. There's talk now about the national study. The Bosman Hotel was opened recently. That's a form of housing first. Portland PHS provides housing first. What makes us a little different is that it's very important to us that we have a minimum level of staff on site for all those projects. So you've got at least 2 people on around the clock, so that you can actually build those relationships that tie into the client-centered approach. So you can have conversations about what someone wants to do once they're housed. Because housing is the easy part. Building a building and putting someone there, that's relatively easy. Judy Graves likes to say it's not rocket science to end homelessness. But what's harder is actually building relationships with people and finding out why they're homeless in the first place and finding out what they want to do next. And that'll only happen through building respect, building trust, and getting to know those people that you have the privilege of working with. The next philosophy or model we use is the strengths approach. And it's emphasizing a person's strengths rather than what they think needs to be fixed or changed. And I talked about fixing people earlier. In hospitals, they talk about the appendix and 3B or the leukemia and this. They refer to people's what needs to be fixed versus the person themselves. And it's good to look at successes. Oh, I'm jumping ahead to success, sorry, to strengths. The information that we receive in our buildings about people, historically or traditionally, you'd have all the information about this person has schizophrenia, this person, this is their medication regime, this person can be violent, and nothing really about the individual and what makes them unique. So we did a real big shift, and all the information in the first page you read, and it's really, really important for new staff or on-call staff, they're getting to know a tenant or client. It's like Stan loves cars, and Stan is a hard worker, and he likes dirty jokes. And then you also need to find out the other stuff, but that first impression is so important when you're getting to know people because it can change how you view that person in a negative way. Now we're talking about success. So we've tried really hard at Rain City Housing to redefine success and look at things that are successes. So these are various things. Sleeping inside is a success. eating breakfast is a success. It's hard to say. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Using less crack is a success. All these things are successes, and they're all positive. What's even harder is looking at negative circumstances and seeing them as a success. And when I used to manage Princess Rooms, there was a gentleman who we brought inside. He'd been living on the street for easily 2 years, and our outreach team was staying in touch with him. And he, every month, we'd have an opening at the end of the month. We'd check in with the outreach team. Is he ready to come inside? No? Okay, wait. Finally, he was ready to make that step and come inside. And that's a success. But what the real success was, when he got inside, he was in for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks. And his room was directly above our offices. And we heard this, one day we heard this fighting and screaming and shouting. We ran up, and this new person who'd just come inside was getting angry and hitting the wall and screaming and shouting at his neighbor for making too much noise. That was a success, because he cared enough about staying, he cared enough about his place, that he got angry. He could have said, screw this, and went back on the street, but he didn't. He actually got angry because he cared to stay inside. So that was a success. Where are we here? We have various buildings throughout the downtown east side. We also have 2 that are located outside the downtown east side. And something that comes up for us, and I think ties into the theme of today about urban renewal versus the downtown east side, is NIMBYism, and people not wanting projects even in the downtown east side or other neighborhoods. And in 2007, we opened a building up on Fraser Street near 41st. And during many of the years preceding the opening, the neighborhood there made it very clear they did not want people with a mental illness, with a history of substance use, living nearby. And NIMBYism, or NIMBY, is not in my backyard, for those of you who don't know. Our executive director had even received a death threat during all the proceedings before that building opened. And one of the unique things about Rain City Housing is that we have a position in almost all our housing programs called Community Integration Support Worker. It sounds a bit clinical, and we may change the name. But it's people working in this capacity have made huge leaps and bounds in terms of our relationships with the community, and more importantly, improving the quality of life with the people we work with. So they really get involved in the neighborhood, and they get the folks we live in and help them get involved in those neighborhoods. At Fraser and 41st, we were attending block parties. We got involved in garden clubs, street cleaning outings. And what happened is that less than a year after we opened, we received a phone call from a neighbor who wanted to know if a tenant living in our building wanted to come and work and garden in her backyard. So it went all the way, flipped right over from not in my backyard to please come and garden in my backyard. So that was a huge success.